So like I said, we've gone through the first 25 chapters. We're up to chapter 26, so we're in the second half of the book of Genesis now, and we'll see some things that'll pop up again, and we'll take a look at that as we go through there. But what I want to do to start off with is let's just read the first 5 verses, and then we'll get going. All right. Genesis chapter 26, verse 1, and there was a famine in the land beside the first famine that was in the days of Abraham. And Isaac went unto Abimelech, king of the Philistines, unto Gerar. And the Lord appeared unto him and said, Go not down into Egypt, dwell in the land which I shall tell thee of. Sojourn in this land, and I will be with thee, and will bless thee, for unto thee and unto thy seed I will give all these countries, and I will perform the oath which I swear unto Abraham thy father. And I will make thy seed to multiply as the stars of heaven, and will give unto thy seed all these countries, and in thy seed shall all nations of the earth be blessed, because that Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. Father, we thank you once again for the time that we have to study your word. And as we take a look at these passages, again, we know and understand where they are in the scriptures. Dispensationally, we understand that, but we can learn from it. And we'll see how we can go through those things. And we thank you for the opportunity that we have your word, that we know that you are trustworthy, that what you tell them, we know that's going to come to pass. And the things that you've promised to us, those will also come to pass as well. We thank you for this time. We thank you for your word. And we thank you most of all for Jesus Christ. And it's in his name we pray. Amen. Now, one of the first things that we notice here is this issue of Abraham. We've already gotten Abraham's passed away. We've gotten into the issue of Isaac and Esau, how Esau sold his birthright to Isaac, and we get down here to chapter 6, and so then we see this issue of Isaac again. Notice in verse 1 he says, And there was a famine in the land beside the first famine that was in the days of Abraham. And so then what the scriptures here is really doing is it's taking us back to a previous time with Abraham, right? And he's making these connections. And it says, And Isaac went unto Abimelech, king of the Philistines, unto Gerar. And the Lord appeared unto him and said, Go not down into Egypt, dwell in the land which I shall tell thee of. All right? So then what we see here is this issue of God coming to Isaac and saying, Don't go to Egypt. What I want you to do is I want you to dwell in the land that I tell thee of. And then what we see in verse 3 says, And I will be with thee and will bless thee, for unto thee and unto thy seed I will give all these countries, and I will perform the oath which I swear unto Abraham thy father. Now again, we keep going and doing this, but I just want to keep reminding ourselves of these things. Go back to Genesis chapter 12, and we see how this has gone from Abraham. Now it's going to go into Isaac, and of course later on we'll see how it's going to go into Jacob as well. And again, what he's doing is the Holy Spirit through Moses is taking us back to Abraham, to the promise that God made to Abraham, right? And in Genesis chapter 12, and again, we learned some more things about Abraham in chapter 26, but notice this. He says, Now the Lord had said unto Abram, and we talked about that issue, is that he had said. It's not, in Genesis 12, he's not taking us to the point where it's doing it. He's saying this is something that God's already spoken to Abraham about, right? And we talked about how Acts chapter 7 really gives us a commentary on that to understand how and when that took place. He says, Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house unto a land that I will show thee. And I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee. And in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. In verse 4, So Abraham departed as the Lord had spoken unto him, and Lot went with him. And we see it goes on down through there. The first 3 verses there, what do we find out? Here's God's promise to Abram. At this time, Abram, he says what? Get out of your country, get away from your kindred, unto a land that I'm going to show you, right? And it's the same thing that we see over here in Genesis. In fact, Genesis 26, what we see here in Genesis 26 is Isaac, he's wanting to go down to, he went unto Abimelech, king of the Philistines, unto Gerar, and what's God say to him? Don't go to Egypt. All right. Now, one of the things that we've gone through and we've noticed before is Egypt is a type of the world system, right? And there's a whole bunch of stuff we can go through and talk about that. But he's telling Isaac, don't go to Egypt, but what I want you to do is I want you to go into the land that I want to tell thee of, right? Same thing that we see over here in Genesis chapter 12. Now, part of this with Abram is God is saying in verse 2, and I will make of thee a great nation. And the idea of great there is, again, this issue of a powerful nation, not so much as size, but it's going to be a powerful nation. And as we talk about these things and think about this, remember, what was the purpose of God calling out Abram? He's going to create a nation, and in that nation, he's going to show the rest of the world what? This is what it looks like if you follow me. Now, of course, that takes us back, and we understand Romans chapter 1 tells us what took place at the Tower of Babel. God gave up the nations unto themselves, and then in chapter 12, then he calls out Abram, and he's doing what he's doing here, all right? And in verse 2, he says, and I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee, and in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. And what is it that God's promising to the rest of the world through Abram here and his seed is what? God's going to bless everybody out there in the world if they do what? Bless Abram and that nation. Now, what we see here in Genesis chapter 26, and of course we see it in chapter 15 with Abraham again, in chapter 17 as well. God adds that covenant of circumcision along with that. But here in chapter 26, notice in verse 2, and the Lord appeared unto him, talking about Isaac, and said, go not down into Egypt, dwell in the land which I shall tell thee of. Sojourn in this land, and I will be with thee, and I will bless thee, for unto thee and unto thy seed I will give all these countries, and I will perform the oath which I swear unto Abraham thy father. And he's telling him what? What I want you to do is stay here for now. I'm going to tell you where I want you to go, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to bless those, and I'm going to give to you these countries, to you and your seed. Now again, you stop and you think about this. We've already talked about the issue of, does Abraham know about the promise that God made, or does Isaac know about the promise that God made to Abraham? All right, we've talked about that. We've seen that issue. We saw it in chapter 25 and prior to that. So what we see here is, does Isaac know the promise that God made to Abraham that they're going to live in this country forever? That's something that he knows, okay? And so when God comes along and says, I will give all these countries, and I will perform the oath which I swear unto Abraham thy father, what does Isaac know? Everything that God told to Abram and Abraham, he tells him that. Verse 4, he says, and I will make thy seed to multiply as the stars of heaven. Now, of course, you got that issue of, didn't God already talk to Abraham saying, I'm going to make, if it's possible, that the number of the stars in the heavens and the number of the sands on the seashore, so shall thy seed be. All right, so that's telling him what? You're going to have a bunch in your lineage, right? Now, specifically, when we get here, that lineage goes from Abraham to Isaac, right? We're here at the point, Abraham's already passed away. We saw that in chapter 24. Here in chapter 26, what we find out is this is not only promised to Abraham, but now God's making the same promise to Isaac, right? And that's what we see here in verse 4. He says, and I will make thy seed to multiply as the stars of heaven, and I will give unto thy seed all these countries, and in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. Now, of course, we've talked about, we know the seed of Abraham and the seed of Isaac. The seed really ends up being who? Jesus Christ, right? You go over to Galatians and you find that out. We understand that. Did Isaac know that he can look out through history and say, well, I know that what God's talking about is Jesus Christ? Absolutely not, right? In his mind, what's he thinking? I'm going to have children. And that's the seed that God's talking about. But what do we know that comes out of that lineage is the seed? And of course, Galatians gives us some information about that. Now, notice this, and this is really interesting to me because we find out we've talked about a lot of bad decisions that Abraham made, But think about we looked at Hebrews and how God looks at Abraham in his life. Notice here in verse 5, what is it when you see in verse 5 it says because that, all right? So that tells us something in front of it, right? When he says in verse 4, and I will make thy seed to multiply as the stars of heaven, and will give unto thy seed all these countries, and thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. Why? Because that Abraham obeyed my voice. Now, when this issue is moving from Abraham to Isaac, one of the reasons that God's saying that he's going to be able to do this through Isaac is why? Because Abraham obeyed his voice. Not only that, but he what? And kept my charge. And when you think about that, he says he kept my charge and what? Kept my commandments and what? Kept my statutes and what? Kept my laws. So then what do we find out about Abraham there? Despite him being a human and making all kinds of mistakes, what is it that God says about him? He obeyed my voice, kept my charge, kept my commandments, kept my statutes, and kept my laws. To me, you think about that. That's God's viewpoint of him. Does God know all the stuff, all the bad mistakes and decisions that he made? Absolutely. Same thing for us, right? And of course, we know and understand that. Now, what happens is God tells Isaac to do what? Stay. What's Isaac do? I'm going to go. And notice verse 6. And Isaac dwelt in Gerar, and the men of the place asked him of his wife, and he said, She is my sister. For he feared to say, She is my wife, lest, said he, the men of the place should kill me for Rebekah, because she was fair to look upon. And it came to pass, when he had been there a long time, that Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked out a window and saw, and behold, Isaac was sporting with Rebekah his wife. And Abimelech called Isaac and said, Behold, of a surety she is thy wife, and how sayest thou, She is my sister? And Isaac said unto him, Because I said, Lest I die for her. And Abimelech said, What is this that thou hast done unto us? One of the people might lightly have lain with thy wife, and thou shouldest have brought guiltiness upon us. And Abimelech charged all his people, saying, He that toucheth this man or his wife shall surely be put to death. Then Isaac sowed in that land, and received in the same year 100-fold, and the Lord blessed him. And the man waxed great, and went forward, and grew until he became very great. For he had possessions of flocks, and possessions of herds, and a great store of servants, and the Philistines envied him. For all the wells which his father's servants had digged in the days of Abraham, his father, the Philistines had stopped them and filled them with earth. And Abimelech said unto Isaac, Go from us, thou art much mightier than we. Now, again, this also takes us back to when Abraham did this, right? To Abimelech. So here you've got Abraham goes in, and he what's he do? And it's really interesting. If we go back, to chapter 20, because it's the same place, right? Here you are in Genesis chapter 20. We see the same thing takes place, and notice. And we talked about this a little bit earlier as well when we went through chapter 20. But notice in chapter 20, verse 1, And Abraham sojourned from thence toward the south country, and dwelled between Kadesh and Shur, and sojourned in Gerar. So same place. And Abraham said of Sarah his wife, She is my sister. And Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. But God came to Abimelech in a dream by night, and said unto him, Behold, thou art but a dead man, for the woman which thou hast taken, she is a man's wife. Now, one thing that we notice here that took place with Sarah is what? Abimelech took her. Did he do that with Rebekah? No. So that's an interesting thing to think about as well, right? But notice in verse 4, But Abimelech had not come near her, and he said, Lord, wilt thou slay also a righteous nation? Said he not unto me, She is my sister, and she even herself said, He is my brother, in the integrity of my heart and the innocency of my hands have I done this. And God said unto him in a dream, Yea, I know that thou didst this in the integrity of thy heart. For I also withheld thee from sinning against me, therefore suffered I thee not to touch her. Now therefore restore the man his wife, and for he is a prophet, and he shall pray for thee, and thou shalt live. And if thou shalt restore her not, know that thou shalt surely die, thou and all that are thine. Therefore Abimelech rose early in the morning and called his servants and told all these things in their ears, and the men were sore afraid. And then Abimelech called Abraham and said unto him, Why hast thou done thou unto thus? And what have I offended thee, that thou hast brought on me and my kingdom a great sin? Thou hast done deeds unto me that ought not be done. And Abimelech said unto Abraham, What sawest thou that thou hast done this thing? And Abraham said, Because I thought, surely the fear of God is not in this place, and they will slay me for my wife's sake. Now, what was the purpose of Abraham saying this is what? He thought of Egypt. He thought of the folks in Gerar. What did he think about them? They didn't believe in God. They did not have the fear of God. So that was the reason that he did that. Are we told that about Isaac over in chapter 26? I think he would have, and I think that's why he was making the same mistake. I think that's why he was doing the same thing that Abraham would have. Well, and we find out that he is, right, and what he does. And to me, it's one of those things, when you see over here in chapter 26, Abimelech doesn't take Rebekah like he did Sarah, right? Now, of course, we find out a little bit later on that Sarah was his half-sister and all that stuff. We talked about that. But here we see, I would have thought Isaac would have known about this from Abraham, but because they're both of them's doing it, right? Yeah, it's like, that's why I was like, I know you are your father's son, aren't you? But I mean, you get that same idea. But here, what's interesting is Isaac doesn't do it because he fears that, or he doesn't think that there is no fear of God in this place. But here it's just, why is it that he does it? Is in chapter 26, verse 7. He said, she is my wife, she is my sister, for I feared to say she is my wife, lest, said he, the men of the place should kill me for Rebekah, because she was fair to look upon. But he wasn't supposed to be in Gerar. He wasn't supposed to be in Gerar anyway. Well, he was supposed to stay where he was until God told him where he was going to take him, right? So you see in verse 3, he says, sojourn in this land, I will be with thee and I will bless thee. Because in verse 2, he says, dwell in the land which I shall, or don't go to Egypt, but stay here, and I'm going to tell you where to go. But he was already in Gerar when he told him to sojourn in the land. Yeah, and so he's basically saying, you need to get back home. Well, that where was he? I thought he was supposed to be in Gerar, and that's why God blessed him in that land. So he's got. Where was it? So in verse 11 of chapter 25, he says, and it came to pass after the death of Abraham that God blessed his son Isaac, and Isaac dwelt by the well of Lo-hai-roi, which was back in chapter 23. Back in chapter 23, when we had the death of Sarah, remember the children of Heth and the deal that they made with them is, if you go back into verse 19, verse 18, and unto Abraham for a possession to the presence of the children, talking about the field and the cave and all that stuff. Verse 19, and after this, Abraham buried Sarah his wife in the cave of the field of Machpelah before Mamre. The same is Hebron in the land of Canaan. So where that well is, where's that well? It's in Lo-hai-roi, which is that same spot there. So it's the same as the Hebron in the land of Canaan. Yeah. So that's where he should have been. But what's he doing is he's going down to Gerar. From what I gather, he's on his way towards Egypt, and God's saying, "Don't go to Egypt," right? So far, all he says so far is, "Don't go to Egypt. You're going to dwell in the land where I tell thee of." And in verse 3, he says, "Sojourn in this land." So stay here. And what's Isaac do? He goes on in down to Gerar, which is well. Because he didn't end up going on down, right? He's in Gerar, right? And so he's in Gerar where you've got Abimelech, the king of the Philistines, and all that. That's where we see him right now. And he's saying, "Don't go down into Egypt," and then he stays in Gerar. Yeah. So then what we see here is he's here, and of course Abimelech. The difference again, one is the reason that Abraham said he didn't. The reason Abraham said she's my sister is because he didn't think the fear of God was in that place. Well, what did he find out about Abimelech? He did have a fear of God, right? And that's one of the reasons why Abimelech ended up being blessed, because he blessed Abraham. Here, what we see is, and again, it's that idea of you get that idea of what y'all were saying a minute ago is, he is his father's son. Here it is. Here we go again, and it's different. It's different this time because it's in verse 7, chapter 26. And the men of the place asked him of his wife, and he said, "She is my sister." For he feared to say, "She is my wife," lest, said he, the men of the place should kill me for Rebekah, because she was fair to look upon. He should have, and based on the record there, that's what he's thinking. He's thinking, and it's possible that Abraham might not have told him about that. But then again, you're thinking he probably. How much information did Abraham give him?
But God had just spoke to him,
saying, "Stay here."
Yeah, but he said, "I'm going to bless you and make thy seed great." Multiply.
Yeah.
So what did he ever think anything but that?
No. Well, and it goes back to the same thing. Abraham's issue was he was worried that Abimelech wouldn't be a person that would fear God. Here, we don't know how much information Abraham would have given to Isaac at this time. So Isaac, here he is, and you see that they go into this place, and he says, "Well, I don't want to tell him that she's my wife," and it's not because he was worried about there was no fear of God. So it kind of makes me think maybe he knew something, but this is more so because she was fair to look upon. Yeah.
Well, and he is human.
Absolutely.
That's
Yeah.
the song that when a man loves a woman, he goes it alone.
Yeah. Yeah.
And all these other men out there.
Yeah.
But she can't be the only pretty woman in the world.
Apparently so. According to Isaac, she's the most beautiful woman in the world, right? Yeah. No, all of us do, right? But that's that same thing. And again, there could have been something in that particular era of time. And I've looked through some things, and I've studied out because of what we've been going through with Abraham and talking about that when he goes out and does that. I've not found anything yet in my studies. If you all find something, let me know. I've not found anything yet that tells me why that they would have said that, other than what we see in Scripture. Abraham thinks there is no fear of God here. Here Isaac thinks, well, I'm afraid because if I tell somebody, and really he's worried about his own life because she's fair to look upon, right? So there's something there, and I've not found anything yet. And again, if you all come across something, let me know.
I tend to think in verse 7, the Bible's so understated sometimes.
Yeah.
The men asked about his wife. That sounds real innocent, but they might have said, "Hey, who? She."
Yeah.
I mean,
And it's possible. You know when you're in high school or whatever. Well, when you're in high school and the new person moves into the school, then everybody's like fascinated by that new person. But I mean, like I said, like there's not something I've seen yet. And And I've looked throughout Scripture so far. I've not seen anything yet that would tell me why he would say, "Tell him you're my sister." Like, I've not found anything yet. And again, if you all do, let me know. But there's something there that both Abraham and Isaac thought about these people, that there's a reason they said, "I'm going to tell them that you're my sister, not my wife." Yeah.
Well, two things. One, I want to state, when Abraham said it, it was actually true, though.
It was.
And Isaac's just lying.
Yeah. And again, and again, you see, why does he do that? In verse 9, he says, "Because I said, lest I die for her." So there's an issue again, but also you think back, Isaac, the one that Abraham took up to offer, and Abraham knew that God would be able to raise him up. Again, if Isaac's worried about, "I'm going to die," does he remember that God can raise him up from the dead? So then there's that other thing. So like there's a whole bunch of stuff there. Did Abraham tell Isaac and understand God could have raised you up? So when I took you up, because again, he's that same person. So if in my mind, what I would think is, if Isaac is thinking, "Lest I die for her," does he at this particular time believe that he has a possibility of resurrected life? Because he would, I mean, there's a whole bunch, and again, we're, as far as this right here, as far as with her specifically, yes, yeah, and that's what I'm thinking too.
Simplify this. Is this another lesson from then to now? Even it still happens with human beings.
It does.
The flesh of the human mind can create things that just simply aren't there.
Mm-hmm.
No matter what the Word tells us today, or God showed them by speaking to them, that's the flesh can create.
So when Paul talks about casting down vain imaginations, he's not just being poetic about it. There are things that we're going to think about that exist that don't exist every single time. And we're going to think that way until something else changes it. Yeah.
So as I read this, and maybe I just don't understand the times, or what these other men would have feared more.
Yeah.
Would they have feared more that she was married, or feared less that she was his sister? Seems to me his sister's available.
Yeah.
Seems they'd fear more that it was his wife.
But he let her go, so.
Yeah. And that's
But I'm trying to think what was going through his mind.
and again, that's why I'm saying, like, there's something there that Abraham and Isaac knew about that city that we're not privy to.
They probably wouldn't have killed Isaac if she was his sister. Probably would have just taken her.
And that's the point, right? He's saying, well, she's my sister, then what's going to happen is they're not going to kill him.
Maybe they just had that reputation in that city that they took other men's wives when they came through town.
Absolutely. And that's something else, and again, I've not seen anything through Scripture yet that tells me this is what they would do in Gerar when they see a guy and a woman and they're married and she's pretty. We're going to kill the guy and take the wife. Because when you go back to Genesis 20, when Abraham goes in, the idea is, he says, "I don't think that they fear God. I'm going to tell them that she's my sister because I don't want to die." And again, we can get a whole bunch of things with that. But it could be that they know something about Gerar that we don't know.
They do know something about Gerar.
They do.
The Philistines become, that's where Goliath.
That's where Goliath comes from.
In the next few hundred years, that's exactly what it is.
And when they go in, Abimelech takes Sarah.
Do you think Isaac and Rebecca parted there, or did she stay with Isaac the whole time?
Well,
It says in 8, after it came to pass, when they had been there a long time,
Yeah.
Abimelech, the king, heard about this.
well, it's not just that he heard about it, but he saw it. Right? He saw it.
Was still with Isaac the whole time.
That I don't know. I mean, again, there's a bunch of information there that we don't have. All we've got is he looks out, king of the Philistines looks out a window and saw, and behold, Isaac was sporting with Rebekah. And then he called Isaac into the principal's office, right? And says, you feel bad for the guy, right? Here you got this Gentile king over Babylon, or the Philistines here, and Abraham's come in, and now Isaac. But again, the difference between these two is, here you don't have Isaac doing it because he doesn't think that there is a fear of God there, not a fear of God there. He does it because she's fair to look upon, and he's worried about his own life. And the difference also is they took Sarah, but they didn't take Rebekah. So there's some things, yeah.
My thought process is, since Isaac made the same statement that Abraham made,
Mm-hmm.
which Isaac could have just simply been like, she's my cousin, which would have been the true statement.
Yeah.
It chose to say sister, which is weird. It's almost like Abraham told Isaac this story growing up and was like, this is what I did to survive, and I thought this was the right decision.
And it's extremely possible, yeah.
He was probably like, if you feel in danger, this is a good move.
And again, they know something, right?
And so, like, it seems very much like Isaac just, like, right when you met the first, he was like, this is my sister, don't kill me.
As soon as you walk in the gate, like, got a big sign, it's my sister, guy. But no, I mean, and again, it could be that. There could have been that information relayed to Isaac. If you go down to Gerar, here's one way that you can make sure that you stay. I don't know. And again, they know something. Abraham knew something about Gerar before he went down there. We know that because he said, I don't think there is a fear of God there, and I'm going to tell everybody that she's my sister, which, of course, we said was true. Now, when we get here to Isaac, again, it's this other issue, but the whole, and you see the exact same thing. Abimelech, in verse 10, he says, what is this thou hast done unto us? And that's the same thing he said to Abraham. Do you realize what you've done to us? He says, one of the people might lightly have lain with thy wife, and thou shouldest have brought guiltiness upon us. And Abimelech charged all his people, saying, He that toucheth this man or his wife shall surely be put to death. And again, it's that same issue that we saw back over in with Abraham and Abimelech. Verse 12, Then Isaac sowed in that land, and received in the same year 100-fold, and the Lord blessed him. Now, again, you think about this issue. What did God tell Abraham, or what is it that God told Isaac? He said, "Stay here until I tell you the land I'm going to send you to." And what's he do? He does that. Now, of course, he makes the same mistake that Abraham made with Rebekah there. But what happens is he stays there and he sows in the land, and received in the same year 100-fold, and the Lord blessed him. And the man waxed great and went forward and grew until he became very great. For he had possessions of flocks and possessions of herds and great store of servants, and the Philistines envied him. For all the wells which his father's servants had digged in the days of Abraham his father, the Philistines had stopped them and filled them with earth. And Abimelech said unto Isaac, Go from us, for thou art mightier than we. So when you think about the promise to Abraham that's now been made to Isaac, what was the promise made to Abraham? Is of thee and thy seed I will make a great nation, and I will bless you and keep you and all this stuff. What happens here is, do the Philistines know? And of course, stop and think about what was the purpose of God separating Abraham out, is to create a nation to show the world, all the other nations, here's what it's like for me to be your God. And what the Philistines see here is what? Isaac is what? He had possessions of flocks, possessions of herds, great store of servants, and we see all the things that he had. He sowed in the land. He received the same year 100-fold, and the Lord blessed him. The man waxed great and went forward and grew until he became very great. And what's taking place is, what did God do? He kept his promise, in spite of Isaac doing what Isaac did. To me, that's awesome. And what's interesting about that is who notices that? Abimelech and the Philistines.
But you have to give it to Abimelech.
You do.
I mean, he protected Sarah.
He protected Sarah and Abraham and Isaac and Rebekah. He was. And so then that's the point, right? Because Abraham goes down and he says, I'm afraid that the fear of God is not here. And what did he learn? The fear of God was there. Abimelech was. Abimelech knew something. I think it's possible. I mean, you think about what he did, and because what happened with Abraham's issue is what happened to Abimelech. Because he protected Abraham, protected Sarah, and they grew there and had all that stuff. What happened to Abimelech? They were also blessed. He did. He did. Yeah. Between Sarah and Rebecca. If we go by the dates, you're looking at about 94 years or so, something like that, 90 to 94 years. He's like, well, your father. No, that's like, I know what you're doing. But I mean, you think again. Of course, they lived a long period of time there, right? So 90 years to them's not much, but and they were Philistines. So there's a whole new issue that goes along with that too, right? I would think that he would be a Philistine as well because he would be the king of them. Yeah. So yeah, but I mean, again, you also think if you think about what's going on, and I don't know, you think about this, and it's like you can kind of go a bunch of different ways. How is it that, we got the Philistines who are giants. What was the origin of those giants? It was unnatural, where some flesh came upon some other flesh, and they created this group of people. That's why he didn't trust them. And so then that's why he's like, they don't have the fear of God in them. Now, does that mean that they were going to respond like their fathers, if you think of it that way, and say, when some woman comes in, whether she's married, we're going to take her? I think there's something there. I don't know, and that's just my own personal, private, subjective opinion. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it was in there. Yeah, so in Genesis 6, when he talks about there were giants in the land, but then there was also after the flood as well, you still would have had this, because that's where you get Goliath and all that stuff coming from too. So there still would have been that issue, because you had those giants in the land after the flood as well.
Were all the Philistines giants?
From what I gather, it would be. From what I would gather. Now, there might be other people that are in the midst that would live there that weren't the bloodline, but I mean, just like, you live in Kentucky, you're yeah.
And the rest of them weren't. That's what I was saying.
Yeah.
A bunch of them were just weird.
Yeah, and you've got this amalgamated version.
They had double rows of teeth.
Yeah, I mean, you had this amalgamation of two strange fleshes, right? And you never know what that comes. But I think there might be something there that he knows something about those people. Now, whether or not that's it or not, and again, I'll just kind of throw that out, and that's my own thought process. I've not found anything to back that up yet, but I think from what we see in Genesis 6 and going on, that there might be something there with Abimelech and those folks with the Philistines and Gerar. But here's the thing: Abraham knew something, right? Isaac should have, if Abraham did what he's supposed to do. But here's what's interesting is you get down to verse 16, and Abimelech said unto Isaac, "Go from us, for thou art much mightier than we." What is it that we know about Abimelech that he knows about Isaac? God's with him. God, and he's, we already talked about, did Abimelech know about Abraham? He knew about Abraham. Does he know that Isaac's his son? Might possibly know that he's his son, and understand where that's going with, because when we get this issue, he knows that Abraham and his seed, God's going to bless. Now, again, I'd kind of throw some of that stuff out there and see if it sticks to the wall or not. You all let me know if it's still there. All right. Now, verse 17. Now, we've already had this issue of the wells that were digged by Abraham, his father, his servants. We see in verse 15, the Philistines stopped them up. In verse 17, it says, And Isaac departed thence and pitched his tent in the valley of Gerar and dwelt there. And Isaac digged again the wells of water, which they had digged in the days of Abraham his father, for the Philistines had stopped them after the death of Abraham, and he called their names after the names by which his father had called them. And Isaac's servants digged in the valley and found there a well of springing water, and the herdmen of Gerar had strive with Isaac's herdmen, saying, The water is ours. And he called the name of the well Esek, because they strove with him. And they digged another well and strove for that also. And he called the name of it Sitnah. And he removed from thence and digged another well, and for that they strove not. And he called the name of it Rehoboth. And he said, For now the Lord hath made room for us, and we shall be fruitful in the land. And he went up from thence to Beersheba. Now, stop for a second. What is it that Abimelech tells to Isaac? What I want you to do is, I want you to go from us because you're mightier than we are. And here he's got this first well that he digs. What happens? People comes in and they fight for it. Second well he digs. What do? They come and fight for it. Third well that he digs. What happens? He says what? Now I know I'm far enough away, right? Because that's what he's saying. Verse 22, And he removed from thence and digged another well, and for that they strove not. And he called the name of it Rehoboth. And he said, For now the Lord hath made room for us, and we shall be fruitful in the land. But they're still in Gerar, right? Because that's where all these wells are that his father's servants dug, and the Philistines filled them all up. So he's going through one by one, and he's cleaning it out. Yeah. And then he went up from there from thence to Beersheba. Verse 24, And the Lord appeared unto him the same night and said, I am the God of Abraham thy father. Fear not, for I am with thee, and will bless thee, and multiply thy seed for my servant Abraham's sake. Now, here's what's interesting here is, what is it that God appears here to Isaac and says what? I think this gets a little bit more information about how much information Abraham gave to Isaac. He says what? I am the God of Abraham thy father. What? Fear not. Why? For I am with thee, and will bless thee, and multiply thy seed for my servant Abraham's sake. And he builded an altar there, and called upon the name of the Lord, and pitched his tent there, and there Isaac's servants digged a well. So what we see is Abimelech says what? We want you to go away because you're mightier than we are. He starts going out and he does that. And he gets to a point, and what happens is God shows up. Now, what did God tell Isaac in verse 2? Go not down into Egypt, dwell in the land which I will tell thee of. Well, what's he telling him here? Here's the land. Right? And that's what he's saying, and that's why we see what he does is he builds an altar there in verse 25. Notice he says, And he built an altar there, and called upon the name of the Lord, and pitched his tent there, and there Isaac's servants digged a well. So what we find out is, here is this point where God says, I am the God of thy father, fear not, I am with thee, I will multiply thee, I will bless thee, and multiply thy seed for my servant Abraham's sake. And he built an altar there and called upon the name of the Lord and pitched his tent there, and there Isaac's servants digged a well. Now, if he is, he's not, he's outside some place, whether he's still in Gerar or not. We know that he's moved away to a point where it's what? They're not going to fight him for it. And God shows up and says, you've done what I asked you to do, and now you're in the place that I told you that I'm going to tell you of. So he's telling him.
He could have actually taken him by force.
He could have.
Mightier than they.
Yeah. And what's interesting is, you think about that, with Isaac here, like to your point, Could he have taken over Gerar? He could have. Sounds like, because they're mightier than they are. But what's interesting is God's going to say, I'm going to give this land to you later on. Don't go take it by force. Right? Abimelech, and that tells me Abimelech knows something about that too. That's why he's saying, I need you to go. Right? Yeah.
So he says in 22, and he went up from thence to Beersheba.
Mm-hmm.
Where
How far away that would be from Gerar, yeah.
It could just be uphill, like Jerusalem, they would talk about going up, and they weren't even going north, they were going south.
Yeah.
They're going up in elevation because Jerusalem was uphill.
Yeah, so there's
well, when we think travel these days, it could be 200 miles. Back then, it could be 20.
a day's journey, right? Or a Sabbath day's journey. But yeah, he went up into Beersheba up at this particular place, but that was after verse 22 when they dug the well and he said the Lord made room for us, right? So then he goes up into Beersheba. Now where that other well was, it would have been in that area near Gerar. Now how far that would have been,
So did they dig wells so that they could travel and have, like, back and forth with it? Because they would dig a well and they'd leave it.
and that's what they did. That's what Abraham's servants did, right? They're digging wells. That, again, that's another one of those things. I've not seen anything yet. And so, again, if somebody else knows something more about them digging wells and why they did it, let me know. But again, that's one of those things in the back of my mind as we're going through this and I'm reading these things, it's just more and more, it's just there's something with the wells. Now, it could possibly be for travel because they know they're going to go from one place to the other. They're going to have water here. They're going to have water there. They're going to have water the next place. The whole point is they're going to get this entire land, right? And part of what God was telling Abraham is, look to the east, west, north, south, walk it. This is all yours. And again, that was the idea of possession. So is the well showing possession? Is that why the Philistines filled it up? Because Abraham died, so it's ours again. I don't know if it's a possession thing or not, but again, that's what I'm thinking based on the verses. But if you find something different, please let me know.
How they try to drive them out of the land, and those up
So they can't feed them, yeah. Because he's got, we just read he's got a possession of flocks and herds and all that stuff, right? So it could possibly be a show of possession. This is my well, or this is my father's well, right?
My name's on that well.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah. So I think it might be a possession thing of showing possession of the land. Again, if you find something different, let me know. But the other thing that we do know is what's he do there once he gets there is he builds an altar. And that's always going to be a thing. Every time we've seen an altar show up so far, what's happened? Called upon the name of the Lord and pitched his tent there, and there Isaac's servants digged a well. Verse 26. Then Abimelech went to him from Gerar. So it tells us where he is in Beersheba. It's some distance, however that distance is. And he says, and Ahuzath, one of his friends, and Phicol, the chief captain of his army. And Isaac said unto him, Wherefore come ye to me, seeing ye hate me, and have sent me away from you? And they said, We saw certainly that the Lord was with thee, and we said, Let there be now an oath betwixt us, even betwixt us and thee, and let us make a covenant with thee, that thou wilt do us no hurt, as we have not touched thee, and as we have done unto thee nothing but good, and have sent thee away in peace, thou art now the blessed of the Lord. And he made them a feast, and they did eat and drink. And they rose up betimes in the morning, and sware one to another, and Isaac sent them away, and they departed from him in peace. And it came to pass the same day that Isaac's servants came and told him concerning the well which they had digged, and said unto him, We have found water. And he called it Sheba. Therefore the name of the city is Beersheba unto this day. And Esau was 40 years old when he took his wife Judith, the daughter of Beeri the Hittite, and Beshmoth, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, which were a grief of mind to Isaac and to Rebekah. Now, of course, that's where we end up there. What do we find out about Abimelech now? And of course, I know we're running out of time, but He still understands there's something different about you. You're mightier than we are. And just to make sure, don't come get us. We've let you go in peace, which you kind of think, did you though? Because they go and dig a well, and what do? We're going to fight you for it. I'm going to dig a well, I'm going to fight you for it. And then they go dig a well. Yeah. To like stop off a lifeline type thing, right? And it's possible. And we see that a lot of times, right? But what Abimelech and Ahuzath, who comes up with him, and it's the chief captain of his army, right? He comes up and says, verse 28, and they said, we saw certainly that the Lord was with thee, and we said, let there be now an oath betwixt us, even betwixt us and thee, and let us make a covenant with thee, that thou wilt do us no hurt, as we have not touched thee. And so you see this idea of how is it that Abimelech responds is what's he doing? He fears the Lord, and he's blessing Isaac. He's made a very smart move. Based on what? He knows something, huh? Well, what he's... Well, by letting him go, by saying, we need you to go. And he's saying he's doing it. He says, and we have sent thee away in peace. Thou art now the blessed of the Lord. And he made them a feast, and they did eat and drink. So the fact that he's saying, we let you go. We didn't force you out. We didn't fight you. We kind of let you go. Now the whales, again, whether or not,
That just seems more like, hey,
by letting them go in peace, well, they're obviously operating in their own best interest, right? Because
the only reason they're nice to them is because they think they can destroy them. Because as soon as they don't,
what do they do?
David and Goliath and all
Yeah.
this other garbage that
Yeah. And so what happens is what the nations at that time know, specifically Abimelech, what happens is as they get farther and farther away from this instance, you see a decrease.
more emboldened.
Yeah.
So, blessing could be, we're not doing this because we're afraid. So it could they be blessed for that?
Well, it's the idea of go, and we let you go in peace.
Well, he is the blessed of the Lord, no doubt.
Yeah.
But I don't know if it just doesn't sound like they blessed him that much.
Well, no, but the idea of we didn't try to destroy you beforehand.
Because we couldn't maybe.
Because he could have at the beginning before he grew up and great and all that stuff. So he's like, I'll let you live.
Character of Abimelech.
Yeah.
Because he even said, back in Abraham's time, he said, would you destroy a righteous nation?
Yeah.
Because we didn't understand.
Yeah.
He did say that.
Yeah.
I think it speaks to his character.
I think it does, and his kingdom as well. But then you look here. He's like, you came to me. You said your wife's your sister. I helped save your life and her life and all that. And so then it's not until they get big. He's like, well, you need to go because I'm afraid of you taking us over.
I was just gonna say, it could be not less of an aspect of like military might or personnel or something like that. More of an aspect of, I know the Lord is with you. No matter how big we are, thou art mightier than me. Even if we are mightier than you as a nation, then doesn't necessarily.
Yeah, no, that's true, and it's the idea of they understand. Abimelech and his people, they know. They understand something's different. They know that God's with them, with Isaac and Rebekah and them.
Apparently they lost that today.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. Well, most everybody has, right? But I mean, you take a look at that, and I think that's what he's going back to. But also the idea, well, I'll let you go in peace. But he knew there was something there. And then of course, verse 34 and 35, we just have Esau tossed in there just to kind of remind us that he's still around, right? And then of course, chapter 27 gets into that. So, all right, a lot of good stuff, good questions, good conversation. And again, those two issues, if you all find something more significant about why they were wanting to say that they were their sisters, not their wives, and I think it might have to do with the giants and all that stuff. And then the digging of the wells. If you find something other than showing possession of something. If you find something different, just let me know.